somewhere in those woods right there, just beyond the tree line going up in that hill, lies a battlefield that the shock and surprise that the Confederate Army put on U.S. Grant and his soldiers out here nearly changed the course of the war here near Richmond, Virginia. Today we're going to take you on that battlefield. We're going to show you what there is out there for you to see. And along the way we'll talk about the soldiers and the fight that happened here at the Battle of North Anna, the river. This trail out here at North Anna is a pretty decent trail. Lots of hiking to do out here. It takes you all the way down to the river itself. And there are a ton of fortifications out here to check out, including the inverted V. We're going to make our way over to the inverted V here in a little bit. And along the way we're going to stop and talk about some of the action that happened here at the Battle of North Anna.
Troops under John C. Breckinridge, fresh off their victory at the Battle of Newmarket in the Shenandoah Valley, as well as George Pickett's division, guarded the way across the North Anna River near Hanover Station. Now, Grant worried that with his army spread out, Lee could defeat him in detail. He would later write that Lee would never again have such an opportunity of dealing a heavy blow. By the afternoon of May 21st, Lee knew that the entire Union Army was on the move. Burnside's 9th Corps marched south, but they encountered Ewell's Corps. Not wanting to bring on a general engagement while the army was spread out, and unsure about the strength of the enemy in his front, Burnside countermarched back toward Spotsylvania Courthouse. Lee instructed Richard Anderson, temporarily commanding James Longstreet's corps, to march at 7 p.m. down the Telegraph Road with Ewell's Corps in front on their way to North Anna. A.P. Hill's corps left at 10 p.m. and swung farther to the west. The exhausted troops traveled through the night in an attempt to get beyond Grant's reach and to buy time for Lee to judge Grant's true intentions. By 8 a.m. on the morning of May 22nd, Lee crossed the North Anna. He had won the race. At the North Anna, Lee placed Anderson's corps in the center, Hill's corps on the left, and Ewell's corps on the right. Hancock and the 2nd Corps approached the redoubt guarded by the South Carolinians. A 100-yard open field was in front of the fortification, which the Southerners knew would allow them to rain lead into the advancing troops when the attacks began.
Now the location that we're close to right now is the Oxford Road, and at this location on May 23rd about 11 a.m. the Confederates started moving along this area to try to protect the line as they knew the Union soldiers were headed closer and closer to Richmond. This is all part of Lee's plan to come out here and try to block the movement.
Brigadier General David Birney's division was chosen to attack the redoubt. Birney's 3,000 men from Thomas Egan, Byron Pierce, and William Brewster's brigades readied themselves for the assault. Egan's troops were split, with part of them attacking down the Telegraph Road, while the others were on the extreme left flank. A mixture of Pierce and Brewster's men occupied the right, with the rest of Brewster's brigade in reserve. When the 12 batteries opened fire on the South Carolinians, it shook the ground, making the Southerners dive for cover, and also neutralized a lot of the Confederate artillery on the south side of the river. Birney attacked at 6:30 p.m. The Confederate skirmishers out front fired only a few shots before being thrown back by the approaching Federals. The 7th, South Carolina, broke first, with some running for the bridge and others running into the river to escape the Union bullets. With their flank gone, the rest of Hennigan's men headed for the rear.
So here's another one of our nice little signs that we like to stop at and check out. Posted up here, you can see these signs on this battlefield here actually give you dates, timestamps, and everything of when the action took place. And according to this, it's May 23rd, 1864, between 11 a.m. and 8 p.m. And it talks about John Lane's Georgia Artillery Battalion, followed closely by Brigadier General Edward Perry's weakened 270-man Florida Infantry. They moved down this road to cover a vital crossing of Oxford. So remember earlier I was talking about we were getting close to the Oxford Road, and it's actually, you can see the cutout here where the road would have been down through here. And there's even Telegraph Road Bridge picture here on the sign. And then of course the map, which is very useful. And what we're taking right now is the Confederate trail that goes down through the Confederate position as it heads towards the North Anna River. And moving right along here, we're about to go over to where David Weisiger's Virginia units were positioned out here at the battlefield for North Anna. And on May 24th, they started constructing a lot of these earthworks that we're going to see, the fortifications that are out here, and they were getting prepared for the battle. Digging in was a common thing, especially that late in the war in 1864. And you have to bear in mind, these guys had just come out of Spotsylvania also. So Battle of the Wilderness was more open than the rest of it. Spotsylvania was a terrible nightmare. A lot of earthworks out there, rain, muddy waters. And here we are again. Grant has pushed off from there, making his way in this direction, and Lee is having to pivot and try to counter that action, and he's out here now. So we're going to go down there and check this place out real quick. So here we are at that stop number 2. And it talks about Colonel Weisiger's Virginians. May 24th, 1 to 4 p.m. And we're at this position here. You can see Weisiger on the map. And then we have Sanders, Harris, McIntosh, Wright. Then down here we're looking at Lane, Lawrence, North Carolina Brigade, Thomas, and Brown. This is out where the railroad tracks run down through here. And then Perry's Florida Brigade, Lane, and Kershaw. All of this out in this direction. And then you can see the Union positions as they're coming in and trying to attack, or they're going to start forming up to try to attack and get across this river. The neat thing about this stop is you can actually see off out in the woods here the original fortifications that these soldiers put up here 160 plus years ago, and they're in pretty decent shape. At the time of the battle, the wooded area out here is not as dense. There are some woods out here, but there are also clearing areas out here too. And this map helps to show you that. You can see the fortifications here, and then a clearing followed by the wooded area, that clearing there, and then the river that flows through here with clearing over there on the other side. It's a pretty neat perspective of what we're looking at right now.
With Hennigan's brigade now pushed over the river, Hancock's 2nd Corps troops began moving across. Now, Lee would need to contend with 2 Union corps across the North Anna, Hancock, and Warren on the far left.
Now, I don't know if you can tell this in the video or not, but out here are all of the earthworks that we were just talking about, were Weisiger's men. They were putting them together on that day. And coming up on the next stop that we're going to, about 300 skirmishers from his line, his Virginians, went out in front of these trenches and spent roughly 2 hours fighting off elements of the 5th Corps as they were coming up through here from the United States Army, and borrowed time essentially for these men to build these strong fortifications that are out here behind me, and it worked. Stop number 3 talks about that battle, that skirmish that we were just talking about. And it also talks about how Grant misinterpreted Lee's withdrawal on May 23rd and 24th as Confederate weakness, and ordered the Army of the Potomac to brush aside the scattered rebel resistance. So he misinterpreted what was going on, and then we end up with this massive battle here that he nearly loses completely at North Anna. Now, it was estimated that had General Lee not come down with some sort of sickness, and some people think that the sickness might have been something to the effect of his heart health, but he came down with a sickness, and he was in the tent near the end of this first portion of the battle here. And had he not come down with a sickness, there would have been a counterattack or something that could have possibly destroyed a portion of Grant's army because it was so scattered and separated. But that's all up to the history gods now.
On the morning of May 24th, 2 regiments from Orlando Wilcox's division approached the river and made it to an island in the middle of the waterway. Developments on the eastern end of the battlefield caused Burnside to halt his men and ordered them not to continue crossing. Part of Crittenden's division made it across at Corral's Mill with the help of Crawford's division from Warren's 5th Corps. James Ledlie's brigade forded the river at 2 p.m., raising their weapons, cartridge boxes, and cap boxes over their heads. They moved out from the beachhead toward the Confederate entrenchments. The brigade quickly pushed back the rebel skirmish line. Ledlie asked his division commander, Thomas Crittenden, for more troops, but he had none to spare and none on hand to quickly support him, so he ordered Ledlie to halt and not attack. Ledlie, as one historian said, was filled with liquor and ambition and decided to attack anyway. The men charged the Confederate line and immediately came under a withering hail of musketry and artillery shells. The front line fell back, and the second line surged forward, only to be met with the same fate. Some of the rebels came out of their breastworks to chase after the Federals and cleared their front of the enemy. Ledlie lost 450 men, or a third of his brigade, in the futile attack.
Brigadier General James Ledlie. There's a name that you will remember and is pretty famous for another disaster. And that disaster would happen to be at the Battle of the Crater. Well, here he is again, one brigade alone, and he's been ordered forward to fight here, and it turns out to be another disaster. The Massachusetts is actually ordered forward here, and this whole unit that he has out here is completely routed. And according to sign here, it says the first unit of the Union 9th Corps to cross North Anna was Brigadier General James H. Ledlie's brigade. His 1,500 infantrymen were ready to advance at 3 p.m., despite having been soaked up to their armpits while crossing the river. Unfortunately for the Federals, one of the worst generals in the Union Army commanded them, Ledlie. And it was said that he was probably drunk out here while he was fighting. The general, a quote here, the general was inspired with that artificial courage known throughout the Army as Dutch courage, the quantity of which seemed to be sufficient to sustain him through this or any other trying ordeal, but the quality was not the enduring kind. That was Captain John Anderson of the 57th Massachusetts that said that. The old Dutch quality, in other words, liquid courage. It's amazing how much of a screw-up that man was, and he still continued to lead men. So stop 5 is for General Nathaniel Harris, who is in charge of Mississippi out here. And at about 1 p.m. they're getting attacked, and you can see here on the map where it shows Massachusetts is coming in to fight, and Harris is right in the center of it. So here we are, this little X mark here on the map. But one of the cool things about this stop is, if you look behind me here, all along the line you can see the trenches where Harris's men would have been, all back in this direction here. But then, if I walk down through here, you get to see something that you don't really get to see on many battlefields. We have staff pits. Right down here, I don't know if you can tell that or not, but there's a big impression in the ground. And then right back here behind me, there's another impression in the ground. You can see the dirt kind of mounding up here. This is where the staff would have been kind of stationing themselves for relative safety. If the soldiers are out there coming in and attacking, and you're in the downward facing slope of this hill, you want to be protected too. So the general officers are back here, and there are several pits that are still in existence out here that you can come out and really check out. And this is the place where the general would have probably been, standing here directing his men on the line in front of us. And I'm going to flip this camera around so you can see a couple of these pits along the line here, and then the trenches that are out front. So there's really no way of showing the depth of this on a flat video, but this is one of those pits, and you can see the dirt mound up as soon as you pass by it. And then we come down through here. There's a Another nice large pit over here. See that circular hole in the ground here. And then directly out front where you see that bridge, you can see the earthworks back here. And Massachusetts is attacking from this direction right over here. So now I'm at position stop number 6, where it talks about the action here on May 24th of 1864 at 6 p.m. Mahone's men are in the trenches here around me. Ledlie has already failed to move anybody in that first attack, that first wave. Ledlie is being told not to attack again. He goes against the orders and he ends up attacking with his courage that we were talking about. Courage to send other men into the fight, that is. The 4th U.S., 10th U.S., 59th Massachusetts, 57th Massachusetts, and 56th Massachusetts are actually coming up in this field directly behind me. Right here. There's a clearing out in that field. The Confederates are standing here waiting, and they can see them coming across. Well, the Confederates wait for them to get about 200 yards distance here, and they've already trained in their guns. And they open up with cannons and musket shots, carbines going on down the line, shooting and blasting these Massachusetts men as they come across this field. And at one point in time, a Confederate soldier stands on the top of these works right over here, and he yells out, "Come on, Yanks, come on to Richmond," taunting them, asking them to come on up. But there's no way that those guys were going to get up here to the top of these trenches, because they were going against all the odds, an entrenched force on a hill, going across that river to come over here, completely soaking wet. These soldiers seeing clearly all the way down this field in front of us and being able to fire for days. It was a death trap out here for those men.
Soon the majority of the corps was across. Approaching their position was the division of Cadmus Wilcox. Rooney Lee, Robert E. Lee's son, and a cavalry division commander notified Wilcox that it was just cavalry in his front and that it would be easy to throw them back. Wilcox advanced toward the river, expecting to encounter some dismounted cavalry, but ran into most of Warren's corps. Griffin's division and part of Samuel Crawford's were in position to throw back an enemy attack, but Lysander Cutler's division had just crossed the river when the attack was commencing. Wilcox positioned William Pegram's artillery on the Confederate right to hold Crawford's men in place while he attacked them in front. The artillery battered the blue troops, preventing their movement, and many shells were fired closer to the river to prevent reinforcements from coming up. When Wilcox's men hit the Union line, it overlapped Warren's flank. The murderous fire from Joseph Brown's South Carolinians and Edward Thomas's Georgians sent the Iron Brigade to the rear, except for the tenacious 6th Wisconsin, who remained at the front. Cutler's other brigades of J. William Hoffman and Edward Bragg came up to stem the tide of the approaching rebels, but Wilcox's brigade leveled their rifled muskets and threw disastrous volleys into their ranks, sending Bragg's troops into a retreat just like the Iron Brigade. Warren's corps was under serious threat of being driven back toward the river. However, Wilcox's success would also lead to his failure. Like with any successful attack, cohesion began to break down. Thomas continued forward, but the 6th Wisconsin fired into his flank. This unexpected volley stunned Thomas's rightmost regiments, sending them to the rear, leaving Thomas with only 2 regiments, the 14th and 45th Georgia, to continue the assault. The success also produced a gap between James Lane's North Carolinians and Joseph Brown's South Carolinians. The gap was so large that Lane believed Brown had fallen back. It was only when Wilcox assured him that their comrades were indeed still fighting that Lane continued the attack. Despite the problems, Brown pushed back the 6th Wisconsin and part of Jacob Schweitzer's brigade, but Warren was quickly rushing reinforcements to the scene. Joseph Bartlett's brigade surged forward, which knocked back Brown's brigade and what was left of Thomas's Georgians. Hoffman's brigade saw an opportunity with Alfred Scales' brigade left alone on the flank. Hoffman charged forward, driving Scales away and securing the beachhead for the Union. The battle in that sector was over, and Warren was able to avoid disaster and act quickly to seal the breakthrough. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Wilcox had nearly routed an entire corps with a single division. Wilcox and Henry Heath pulled their divisions back to a strong line that Lee assembled, despite a salient being present. The engineer in Lee and the suggestions by his subordinates helped to create a great defensive line with interior lines and a great reserve. Hill's corps stretched from the North Anna to the Little River on the Confederate left. Richard Anderson's corps occupied the center, with George Pickett and John Breckinridge's divisions in reserve. Richard Ewell's corps was on the left. His front and flank was protected by a swampy area.
Directly out in front of me here are some emplacements that you should be able to clearly see on camera as I pan around. You can see that large mound there, the flat surface that goes out through here, the earthworks, and then the large work here. This next location comes with a pretty sad story. As the 12th Mississippi came out of their trenches and charged down the hill, attacking the Union soldiers that were coming up the hill, they overwhelmed them. And then you had the 11th Alabama also attacking one side of their flanks. Chandler, Colonel Charles Chandler of the 57th Massachusetts, was hit. He was mortally wounded. And as he was laying on the field and his men were taking off, he yells at them, "Save yourself if you can." In other words, leave me there, I'm gone. It's a real sad moment in history for those men, one that they surely didn't forget, and they came back to this field to remember it. So here we are at that position. The nice map gives us a spot. 12th Mississippi, 57th Massachusetts comes out here. You have more men that are going to come out from here and swing out this way and hit them headlong. 11th Alabama's over here, and 57th is making their way down that way. This is directly out front of this position that we're at right now. It's pretty amazing to think about this position here, looking down forward to where the Massachusetts man came up, and then all of these earthworks here where the Mississippians and the Alabamians would have been positioned waiting to fight and then going over the top there and attacking Massachusetts. It's an extremely sad story at any point in time when any soldier dies on a battlefield. Obviously there's people that are going to be missing them, but this field here is something else. So here we are walking along the line, and we're going to come out here to this inverted V. And there's the trenches. Stops here. And it makes its way back through this direction here. It's pretty amazing the condition that this stuff is in still today, even though it's pretty worn down. I don't know, there's something about this place that's kind of crazy to think about. The fighting that happened out here and how historic this ground is. So we're now at this stop right here where Crittenden men and Ledlie's men came up through the field here, called the famous inverted V, which is stop number 8. The action happened here at 6:45 p.m. And you can see the earthworks as they go along through here. They end all the way out there at that point behind that tree, and then they come back around through here. And you can actually see some of them, the earthworks right back through here too. Now, at this position, a Confederate soldier from the 2nd Battalion Georgia Volunteers was quoted talking about the fight that happened out here when Ledlie's men, the 57th Massachusetts, got overran out here by the 11th Mississippi. And he said, "A tremendous volley to our left, followed by the unmistakable rebel yell, told us plain enough that the Mississippians had struck the Yanks, and as the yelling and the firing came towards us, it was evident enough that the Yanks were on the run. As they passed us, Tinley and I made a few more shots at them. As the Mississippi boys came up, a big strapping fellow called out, 'Bang it, boys, but ain't we making them think it's Christmas, though?'" That was his description out here, this fight at North Anna. May 24th comes to a close. General Grant's got his army split up in 3 different sections on the front here, across the river, in front of that inverted V. And he's separated so badly he knows that nothing good can come of this, and he has to figure a way out. General Lee, on the other hand, had a plan to wake up the next day and attack Hancock. And he was going to do it in a way that would probably crush that corps. But it was not to become a battle out here, because Lee takes ill and he can't lead the attack. And he's the orchestrator of this attack. So he sits in his tent. The rest of the army sits stagnant, waiting for an attack to come up the hill. Union Army at this point is not dumb enough to come back up that hill and really fight. And now they're going to have to redeploy and find another position to fight from or move on. And that's exactly what Grant plans to do. He plans to move on. Being out here today, it's kind of hard to visualize what this battlefield would have looked like back then, because there's lots of trees around. Whenever these soldiers are coming out here to create these earthworks, they're cutting down the trees. And you have that plain open field that used to be out there is no longer wide open. And that's where the soldiers were coming across. So this place was vastly different looking. But the earthworks out here are in really good shape. This is a great place to go for a hike, and an awesome place to check out some rare sites when it comes to fortifications that you don't get to see in many of the other Civil War battlefields out here in Virginia. Because quite frankly, this field's not visited that often. It's just north of Richmond, on the other side of Ashland area, where the Bass Pro Shop is, if you're interested in coming out here and checking it out for yourself. So from this vantage point here, it's gonna be kind of hard to see on camera, but this cliff just completely drops off, and then out in that distance there, you can actually see the river of North Anna. This is one of the artillery positions that the Confederates have overlooking the river to the other side where the Union soldiers are gonna have to come from. It is very easy from up here to see exactly what's happening when it approaches the army here. Lee, like we said before, is struck with illness. He's sitting in his tent and he's saying over and over again, we must strike them a blow. We must not let them pass around us. But it doesn't come to fruition. He's too ill. The army is stuck in place, and Grant moves on. So the position that I'm in right now, the 10th Georgia Battalion Artillery is out here in this location. And there's some fortifications that are still out here along these ridge lines where they would have been positioned, but also Florida is a part of this flank as well. Florida's out here as part of the infantry for the flank. Right around the 25th or 26th of May in this position, Union artillery is on the opposite side of this field, and Grant, realizing that he has to leave and redeploy, doesn't just want to leave things open for interpretation on the Confederate side. So what he does is he starts up an artillery duel across these fields. Some 3,000 pounds or more of artillery shells are flying over here. People are ducking and covering all over the place. Artillery mortars are going off, bursting throughout this wooded area as Florida is taking cover. Georgia's battalion of artillery is firing back across this field, and they are lighting up the sky as well. Here in a minute, I'm going to flip the camera around so you can see a picture that's on this sign for stop number 10 out here on the Confederate or Gray Line. And there's a nice picture on there of Union soldiers taking a bath in the North Anna River. It's kind of a famous photograph that happens right out here where the telegraph road and the bridge is in the background of that photograph. And we'll put the picture up on the screen too so you can kind of see what we're talking about. So it's kind of hard to see, but on the sign, they show you that small picture of the Union soldiers that was taken right out here, taking a bath in the river. And the river is right off in the distance over here and all down through there. We're going to try to make our way down to the river here in just a second and see it from ground level instead of way up here at the heights that we're at. And you can see the X marks the spot. There we are, Mahone and McIntosh, all the artillery, everything's moving back in this direction with Kershaw and Anderson. We were back over here just not too long ago, making our way in this direction. So now from this position, I'm actually walking down towards one of the areas where the Massachusetts men came up and where Mississippi met them over here, attacked them, and actually took some of them prisoners of war. And out in this area is where that colonel we were talking about actually fell mortally wounded. An officer on the opposite side of this earthwork here, Confederate soldier, actually took possession of the items from that officer and returned it to the family. And it was spoken of very warmly by his opponents out here, his humanity for his enemy. There were a lot of examples like that during the American Civil War. So out here at the position on the blue trail, directly in front of me, Lieutenant Colonels Charles Chandler and Stephen Weld had some very difficult decisions to make out here. And this sign really depicts what happened out here. Very good, actually. It's one of the best descriptions. It says, "The crack of thunder and flash of lightning echoed across the ravine before you as the men of Ledlie's brigade struggled to survive the relentless Confederate rifle and cannon fire which targeted them with fatal precision. The low ground offered some cover to the desperate men from Massachusetts who paid a deadly price for their attack. The open ground ahead proved impossible to move through, but to withdraw meant falling back without orders. The sight of the 12th Mississippi Infantry coming over the rebel earthworks ahead of them decided the matter, and Ledlie soldiers began to sprint back to safety. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler, leading the 57th Massachusetts, halted the nearby commander of the 56th Massachusetts, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Weld, shouting, 'Weld, what are you going to do?' Weld responded, 'I don't know, Chandler.' Chandler replied, 'I'm going to rally my men and try to make a stand.' Weld faithfully answered, 'I will join you.' Before Chandler and Weld could rally more than 60 men individually, Colonel Mary B. Harris and his men fired a volley from only 40 yards away, sweeping away the remaining fragments of the Union defense, and Chandler sank into the mud mortally wounded. Weld was wounded in the side, and the survivors ran for their lives. All of this happened right out here in front of us, heading up that hill towards those Confederate earthworks, right up in front. It must have been a crazy scene out here. Can you imagine that scene from back there? The fire and brimstone coming from that hill, these Union soldiers running for their lives, and that officer falling. It's something else. So this position here overlooking the ravine actually gives us a really unique perspective of the action that happened out here on this field. Going back in this direction, you can just barely make out the actual earthworks that are up on the top of the hill there. And the 12th Mississippi is actually right about there. They come out of their earthworks and travel in this direction here, and then come down the hill towards the 56th Massachusetts, which is actually right about where we're at. At least they're trying to attack in this direction. Because if you look on the ground here, I don't know if you can see it in this video, but there are indentations here, an indentation here, another indentation here. So just on the other side of this ravine is where that Georgia battalion is with the artillery facing in this direction, posted just on the other side of this ginormous hill that these men from Massachusetts are coming down, thinking that they're in the clear. And that battalion's firing in that direction. And just as Massachusetts crests that hill and starts to come in this direction, Mississippi comes up and hits it. Massachusetts makes its way down towards the ravine, but they never quite make their way up. And they end up getting pushed back up the hill and back down the other side. It's a pretty amazing thing. Let's take a look at this sign over here, and maybe it can kind of show you what I'm talking about. Get my shadow out of that picture there. So you can see that ravine right here. There's that 2nd Georgia Battalion rifle pits. And then 12th Mississippi, where we said, comes out and goes over in this direction and hits the 57th and the 56th directly head on their flanks as they're coming down the hill. I'm going to stop number 3 here on the blue line, and it's talking about the Union soldiers that were a part of Massachusetts that came out through here. And one of the connections that it talks about for this battlefield here is with the connection of Andersonville, the infamous prison down in Georgia. 80 men from Ledlie's unit were actually captured here and sent to Andersonville, Georgia. They have a picture here with Phillips, Walton, Watkins, and Payne. Their tombstones from Andersonville, Georgia, where they were buried because they succumbed to the deprivations that happened there at that prison camp. And it talks about many were unable to reach the safety within the forest, which is back in this direction. And then it says the first 2 to die in captive was Antonio Phillips and Lyman Bryant. They died on the same day in July of 1864. Ironically, Phillips was a resident of Oxford, Massachusetts, leaving behind 6 children. Edward A. Walton, a machinist from Worcester, was the next to perish on August 10th of cruel neglect, exposure, and starvation. And a quote here said, "He has left behind a fond wife and child, who, with his grief-stricken parents and brothers, mourn his sad and painful death." There's a lot of that happens for many of these soldiers that were captured and taken to prisoner of war camps. And just recently, we went over to Belle Isle to see what was left of those camps. No doubt, these Civil War battlefields, like the one behind me here, North Anna Battlefield, is an extremely important place, and the battles are important to remember. But so are the prisoner of war camps, and very few of them are left behind with a trace of anything there, or even so much as a monument marking the death and the starvation of the soldiers that perished out there. It's absolutely amazing and horrendous, the treatment that these soldiers went through in captivity, and yet we don't preserve those places to talk about that. It's part of our past that we really just look past, I guess. I wish more could be done for Belle Isle, just like all the other prisoner of war camps. But at least Andersonville does a great job of telling the story. And these men are buried down there. And you can go see their headstones, which I have actually seen many years ago when I went down to Andersonville. Sometimes soldiers that are friendly to you on your side aren't exactly friendly. Out here on this sign at stop number 5 in the blue line, they have a Private Vincent DeLong from New York. And he was talking about the Massachusetts men that just came back through these fields here with Ledlie in full retreat. And in his diary he wrote, "Nothing of much importance took place, only the 4 and 10 regulars run like sheep." That's what he thought of them. Those poor guys have been driven into that situation by Ledlie himself. Must have been crazy to see. Somewhere out here on this riverbank, there was a hospital that was set up. And Color Sergeant Leopold Carpellis was out here. And he was holding onto his colors when he was wounded. And Chandler had told him to leave the colors behind and go to the rear. So he waited till he was ordered to go to the rear with his wounds. And he comes back down this hill to the hospital that's over here. Well, later in the evening, he finds out that Chandler actually died. And the rumor was Chandler died because he was trying to protect the colors from being taken from other soldiers. He was pretty much inconsolable at that point, thinking that he was the reason that his colonel died. Carpellis eventually ended up getting the Medal of Honor awarded to him because of his actions at the Wilderness. And he goes on to survive the fight here at North Anna. It's a pretty amazing story. All right, I'm coming up on it now. Let's see what we got out here. That's pretty cool. Check this out. Big, beautiful open river. Nice scene to ponder the actions of the American Civil War out here on North Anna River. And you can see the opposing side over there, the Union side just above me there on the heights. And of course we are in the Union side right now too, because they crossed over that river and they ended up over here. This is where they took their respite. This very same river is also where that famous photograph is taken, where the soldiers are out in the water taking a bath out there in the North Anna. It's pretty amazing. I made it down to the bottom here where the actual river is, and I could see way up on the hill there where we were in the Confederate position. One of the neat things about this place is you can actually walk all the way down to the river, and there's nice 3 different sections where you can actually walk out to the river, see the river itself, and even during summertime you'll see people out here floating down the river or relaxing by the water. It's real neat. See if we can't get out there to that part of the trail and get some good shots of that river, that very historic North Anna River. So I see some river rocks out here. I'm trying to make my way out. It's pretty cool. Look at that scene. Good old North Anna, right there behind us. I'll flip it around here. It's real pretty out here. Pretty amazing.
Warren moved his corps to Knoll Station on the Virginia Central Railroad, and Horatio Wright's corps took the place of Warren's men across from Jericho Mills. Hancock was moving his divisions and brigades across the Chesterfield Bridge, attempting to shore up his lines. Hancock didn't know exactly where Robert E. Lee's lines were, so he ordered Division Commander Francis Barlow to probe south along the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad. Barlow chose Thomas Smith and his brigade to reconnoiter the front, and as they pressed south, they came into contact with Confederate skirmishers. They knew the main line wouldn't be far away and swept the skirmishers aside and came into contact with Par Charles Field and Robert Rhodes's divisions. Smith bolstered his line with other troops from the brigade, but knew he couldn't push the enemy from their position. Later, Barlow sent John Brooks' brigade to stabilize Smith's right flank, but realized the heavily entrenched rebels were too much for his two brigades and called off any attack. By that evening, Grant knew he needed to change strategy. He ordered Warren to test the Confederate line in his front, and after some probing, Warren reported that, "I feel satisfied that I should have great difficulty at best in whipping the enemy in my front." Grant and Meade held a council of war to decide what to do next. Some officers suggested moving to the east, keeping in constant communication with Washington and their supply base. Others thought they should move to Lee's left and push on from Richmond from the northwest. Grant decided on that strategy, but the next day reversed his decision. They would move east and swing around Lee's right flank.
Well, it's been an absolute blast out here at North Anna, going up and down these trails. And really it's not bad. The rough trail that they talked about here being the roughest trail is about a little over half a mile in one direction. And there is some steep terrain on it, which I'm about to have to go back up here in a second. But it's really not that big of a deal, and it's a gentle slope. And also coming out here to this river was pretty magnificent to see it for myself and relax on the rocks and think about all the good things that have been coming our way here on this channel. Today, we hit those 5,000 subs that we were looking for. So it's been pretty magnificent out here in North Anna. Can't wait to bring you the next story. Until next time, it's History with Waffles.